Well, it's great to have you guys out, and thanks for making the time on Saturday. And then just because we're recording, appreciate the, keeping the ups and downs to a minimum, and that way we're able to, have something that lasts forever. And then you don't have to be the person that everyone's like, oh, I remember you. You're the one that got up and smiled at the camera on the way out. And so we'll kind of keep that rolling. Well, I'd like to start this next session, and feel free to continue having your lunch. And thankful for a number of folks who put that together for us, and it's just our way of saying thank you to you. This Gospel Grace 101 at the very core is we just want you to know as much as you can about Gospel Grace, and that includes where we're going, that includes who we are, but also includes where do we come from. And the reason for that is we want you to kind of know what's going on. We're a very active church. We're a very purposeful church. We want our members to participate in all that the Lord has given us, and it's not just a passive sit event here. And so we'd love just to do some intros. Well, I'm gonna warn the pastors in advance. I'm gonna ask them to share just a little bit about their families and maybe a few things. And maybe because we're recording, if you guys don't mind coming up this way and just we'll phase in. We'll start with Lucas and Liesl Counterman. And Lucas and Liesl, I knew Lucas when he was single. He knew me when I was single. Our wives actually traveled on a ministry team together. And then Lucas, give us the names of your children, and then also maybe something unique or interesting about them where they're at.
Okay, so my oldest is my son Elijah. You can see him off on the right-hand side. He goes to the University of Utah, and he'll graduate this December. So his hope is to pursue medicine. And so he just took his MCATs and is waiting for his score. So he'll be spending the summer on a medical missions team, going to Zambia and Honduras, starting in Atlanta, but then spreading across there. So that's my son Eli. My next one down is Eden. So she's my oldest daughter. She's a senior at Highland High School in Sugar House, and is planning to go to the University of Utah in the fall. And today she just did her cello performance audition for the U. So we'll see how that went. But she's a cellist and a sweet girl. Then my next one is Cana Grace, and that's Cana. And she was named after the place where Jesus did his miracle of turning water into wine, and his disciples first believed on him. So that's Cana, and she's in 10th grade, goes to Highland High School, learning to drive.
Oh boy.
So yeah, that's Cana. And then this is our bundle of joy. This is Lydia. She's 10 years old, brings a lot of joy to our home, and she's in elementary school at Capitol Hill Academy.
Hey, now Lucas, I didn't warn you about this. What's one thing that you enjoy outside of Gospel Grace Church?
Okay, before I answer that though, Will, I want to introduce my wife.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Since she's going to watch this recording.
Right.
Let me introduce my wife of 21 years, right? So this is Liesl, my lovely wife, Liesl. She just went back to school about a year and a half ago to work on a master's degree in writing. So she's doing a Master of Fine Arts and finishing that up and writing her thesis this summer. So that's Liesl. She plays the piano. You'll see her sometimes on worship team, and wonderful lady, and kind of my partner in life. So super thankful for her. So one thing I enjoy outside of Gospel Grace Church work, Will, is I enjoy running.
Okay.
So I try to do the half marathon in the summer for the Days of 47. I try to do that, the Immigration Canyon run. I enjoy doing that with my son. We run together in the city. And I enjoy reading. I have a lot of books. So it's like Christmas all the time. I order books. They come in Amazon boxes, and that's
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right, great. Then we got Lucas, and Lucas serves as lead of Gospel Grace Church, and so he takes the primary teach-preach responsibilities. And then we got Joe and Beth Kopp, and you do the same with your family?
Yes, I'll start by introducing myself as Jon.
So my brother is Joe, and he is not married to my wife, thankfully. So I'm Jon, and that's my wife, Beth. We've been married for 17 years. We met in college at an event that we were both working at. We had some mutual friends. I was working parking, and she was working registration, and it started raining, and I held an umbrella for her. So that was the beginning. Wonderful. 17 years we've been married. We have 3 kids. So my oldest is 14. She is in middle school, and we're learning what it means to have a teenager in our home in middle school that is a girl. And so all of those things are wonderful, and also we're growing together in that. So love Karis. She plays the cello as well. Eden was her first cello teacher. You saw Eden up here, so that's pretty neat. And then she's also teaching herself ukulele right now with the powers of YouTube. So that's pretty great. My middle son is Andrew. Andrew is 10 years old and loves all things war, battles, fighting, anything that has to do with conflict. It seems Andrew likes that. So he has Legos, but he mostly likes to set up the Lego men in a war and have them fight. So that's pretty cool. Then my youngest is Caleb. He's down there. He's 7 years old. And he's a tender boy, but he's also very funny. And then he loves to read and do arts and crafts, and there's all kinds of pieces of paper all over the house that have partial drawings on them that Caleb has done. So
okay,
that is our career.
So your question is, since you like to travel, what's one of your favorite places in Utah outside of Salt Lake?
Favorite places in Utah outside of Salt Lake? That's tough. I think my favorite place, it's kind of like a secret. It's Cedar Breaks National Park. We like to go there in the off season because you can get up to like 9,000 feet above sea level, and you can leave 100 degrees here and be at 70 degrees there. So we stay up at Bryan Head Resort in the summer for a few nights and hike Cedar Breaks. That's one of my favorites.
Well, thanks, Joe. I've known Joe now for about 20 years, and we're really close. So,
Love you.
All right, great. Thanks, Jon. All right, let's do MacAvoys. We got Josh MacAvoy. Introduce your family for us.
Okay, here's the family. I'm Josh. That's Christy. MacAvoy, we've been married 15 going on 16 years now, and we actually knew each other in junior high. Went to the same church, and then right before our senior year of college, we were both back in the area and got reacquainted in different ways. And I was like, wow, she's amazing. And so we've been married for 15 years now, so that's awesome. Then we have 3 boys. We have Tyler. Tyler is now in middle school. Tyler loves math and robotics and designing and all of those fun things. And that's kind of his speed. Then we have Brody. Brody is 5th grade right now. He's 10. He's a reader, and he loves to play games, and he loves to have a lot of fun. And he's a caring little guy. We love him. We love all of them. But I don't know why I said we love him, because it just goes in the wrong direction. And then we have Hudson. And Hudson, as you can see, he's the youngest. He's got a lot of different energy. Christy says that he is my duplicate. He does a lot of things, which means I know all of his little struggles that I've struggled with. So I think God's helped me to guide him through life. But he has a ton of energy, and he loves to make people laugh. And he's a sweet kiddo. So that's our family. We also have a dog. And that's it. Our dog's name is Chase.
All right, so Josh, your question is you're one of our bivocational pastors. What's been one of your favorite jobs you've ever worked outside of being a pastor at Gospel Grace?
I like what I'm doing now, and that's probably my favorite one. Work for a engineering firm, a built environment engineering firm. I can talk way too long about that.
All right.
I also did fire safety. I also worked in the jail, so I've got all kinds of experience, so I can tell you more at some other point. Ask me questions.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And then we got Jotham and Erika. Jotham, do you mind?
Okay, introduce my family. I'm Jotham. That is my wife, Erika. We met right here at Gospel Grace Church. And we got married. Erika was meeting with Lucas's wife at the time, and I was meeting Lucas on Tuesdays, and we would cross paths at their home, and that's how I saw Erika bring a basket of fruit, and I was like, that's a woman worth marrying. And fruit. So Erika and I got married in 2017, and since then God has blessed her with 2 children, with Johanna, who's about 2.5 now. She's what I call a wild child. And then Jonathan, who is right there. He's about 11 months now. He's kind of the opposite of Johanna, and I'm hoping that they kind of rub off on each other and averages out somewhere into a good, healthy balance.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. Who is, in Utah, who's your favorite racquetball partner?
Okay. It has to be Will.
All right, now, good, all right. So we used to play racquetball before he broke his ankle or twisted his ankle real bad. So we got to get back into that.
Yes, we do.
All right. Well, thanks. And then mine. Let me introduce my crew. So I'm married to Christy. It's actually Christy's birthday today, and she's 32, I think. And okay, not. And but we've been married for 20. We're going on 22 years. And then this is Anna Grace. She's right now a junior in college. She's studying abroad right now in England. And then we got William. He's a freshman in college in Ohio. And then Lily is a senior in high school. And David right here is 15 years old. And then this is our youngest, Ellie. And she's seventh grade. And so I'm thankful for our crew. We used to travel all over the United States, our family, and we would minister in different churches, and we were part of Gospel Grace Getting Planted, but we spent about just a little bit under half of a year here, and then travel the rest, and then we would, just in 2019, we moved here full time. Just to give you a little bit of history of Gospel Grace, in 2011, there was 4 of us, myself, Lucas, Jon Kopp, and then Jonathan Albright, and we were just praying, saying, Lord, what would you have us to do? How could we connect? How could we plant a church? Where would you want us to plant a church? And if you did all the demographic studies, Utah is the least evangelized state in all of the United States. There's other places that have just as many needs as Utah, the difference being that Utah has never had a real work of God's Spirit in a massive way in planting churches all up and down the state. In fact, just think about this. There are more Christians in Utah today than there's ever been in history. And yet evangelicalism is less than 3% of the whole state. And it's just there's such an amazing need right here in Utah. And that's really what began to stir us up, began to motivate us to consider coming out to Utah. And so we flew out here, we did a little survey trip, and as we met pastors and met different individuals and drove around, the Lord just continued to use Scripture. He began to use conversations, opportunities, and just to really work in our heart by faith to relocate to Salt Lake City. There wasn't really a group of believers here that were saying, come. And there wasn't really one church that was saying, hey, you come under our umbrella and we'll send you. Now, it was just, by God's grace, it was just the 4 of us coming from 4 different directions. And Hebrews 12 just meant a lot to us. By faith, you read that chapter, Hebrews 11, and there's all of those by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith. And we just really believed that God wanted us to move out to Utah. And so we got out here in August, and a little bit before that, so I think it was Jon and John, I think, did a little survey trip or something, and they found this chapel up right next to the University of Utah. It's actually on Fort Douglas property, but I think the university property is like right there. And they rented out this facility to us, and it was at the beginning, it was closer to about $50 a week, and so we came out here knowing that we'd have a place to meet. And so one of the pastors and their families got here like on a Wednesday, and then another on Thursday, and another on Friday. I know we got on Saturday, and there was about 70 folks that wanted to gather that next day on Sunday. And so this isn't a picture of that first service, but we all packed into this chapel, and really within just a few, maybe about 6 months or so, things began to get full. We started with about 70-ish folks, and it got kind of, little bit low, like in the 40s, like in January and February, not temperature, but people. And then as we just continued, the Lord began to grow us. And soon we're just sitting on each other's laps. I mean, we're just packed in. There was times people were sitting in the aisles. And this would seat maybe 125, 150 max. I mean, and yet the Lord just began to bring people, grow people, bind our hearts together as a group of believers. We then relocated that. Remember I showed you that picture right here. This is a hospitality building for the University of Utah. And there was they called it the ballroom. And the ballroom was a just a bigger area. There's more rooms than what you could see here. And we began to just see more people come. A lot of times when you're starting a church, the size of the building kind of caps out how many people feel comfortable in coming. And so we began, by God's grace, just to facilitate this space. And but man, we were starting to, towards the end, by the time you rent this room and this room and this room and this room, we went from $50 a week to almost $3,000 a month in rental. And we just said, Lord, would you just give us another location? Would you just give us another location? We began to look for some. And I mean, it's just, do you guys know anything about property in Utah? And so it's always been difficult, but even more than it is now. And we, at this time, we were also doing what we call plant camps. And plant camps are a summer camp where we invite students from outside of Utah to come to Utah to do missions work in Utah. And we began to have some youth groups that were coming out and doing these plant camps. And we would do a lot of our outreach in Liberty Park. And so we began to use these facilities in the summer, right here. This was another church. This was the church at Liberty Park. We'd use their auditorium as a gather point, preach point, and then they'd go out and do evangelism and so forth. Well, that church needed to relocate, and they needed to downsize, and so they wanted to sell this to another church. They approached us. They said, hey, would you all buy this building for 1.2-ish, 3-ish million. And we were like, oh boy, I don't know, we think it's worth $900,000. And they said, no, we've got a developer that's willing to pay $2 million, turn it into condos or townhouses, and then make us equity partners. And we're like, oh, 1.3 sounds about right. And so we just began to say, Lord, you gotta do something. We can't do this. We know Lucas has a bunch of money, but he doesn't have all that money, and Jon Kopp for sure doesn't have the money. And so, Lord, what are you going to do? And the Lord just did a work. There was about 100 and some thousand come up out of our little congregation. This gentleman that just got burdened about this, he lived outside here. He had a foundation that gave us hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there was a church that got word, and they gave us $120,000 or $150,000, and so all of a sudden we have half of it. And so we go to the bank. We say, hey, we know we're a church plant, but we got half. This building's worth X amount out of dollars, and they gave us a loan. And so by God's grace, we were able to move in. And we learned a lot in that process. We learned that first of all, it's God who provides, isn't it? But what else we learned is we learned that we're not islands in and of ourselves. We could have never done this in our own strength. We needed not just let me rephrase it. We need the Lord to work, and God works through people. He works through others. And the Lord, the very beginning, was just removing any sense of pride that somehow we did this, that somehow this is our, look what we did. God was doing this work. God wanted there to be a gospel preaching church right here by Liberty Park. And, being by Liberty Park, this is the most wonderful, wonderful location for a church. There's 40,000 vehicle impressions every day that go past us on 713. In the park, there's usually a minimum of it's between 300 and 400 people in the park, upwards to just north of 1,000 at different times. It's an unbelievable location for people to know and hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And so the Lord just continued to bless. We immediately when you have more space, more people are able to come, and we just saw a real growth. At the very core of Gospel Grace, philosophically, we've got one of these core values. We call them culture codes. It's purposeful multiplication. we never wanted to be just a one and done church. Like at the very core, we want to be a church that's always looking to plant churches that would network with like-minded churches to plant even more churches. And so at the very, very beginning, we just began to say, okay, Lord, where else do you want us to plant? Where else do you want us to go? You know, as we surveyed a lot of the churches in Salt Lake City just to see where are other churches, where are like-minded churches, where are churches that are going in the same direction. You can kind of see some blue and some yellow and some red dots. At any given time, there's about 80 to 90 churches in the Salt Lake Valley. The Salt Lake Valley is about 1.2 million people, and there's 80 to 90 broadly Protestant churches, as we just did. You could cut that down to about 60 for evangelical churches, and then about 20 to 40 of churches that are just moving forward and have good doctrine and are growing in grace. But you contrast that with the predominant worldview. I mean, it's just there's such a great need. There's such an obvious need for more gospel preaching churches in Salt Lake City. More gospel preaching churches, and not just Salt Lake County, but Utah County and Weber County, and I mean you just push it out. I mean Summit County, and I mean you just keep on pushing it out. And the almost now 4 million people that call Utah home, there's a need. And so we began, by God's grace, we're saying, okay, Lord, how can we spread out? What else can we do? And so we began to put together a church planting team. And there was a guy by the name of Danny Brooks, and a friend of ours by the name of Kevin Inafuku, and one of our interns that was with us, and Daniel Kaminsky, and we just began to say, Lord, how would you let us plant another church? And we began to reach out to some of those churches down this area. We're like, wow, there's a need down here. So we started to reach out to some of these churches down here, and there was a church. It's called Trinity Baptist Church, and Lloyd Larkin was a faithful pastor who had been leading Trinity Baptist Church. They'd been in existence for about 20 plus years, and yet they just never could break that 50, 60 barrier. I mean, they would kind of get up to mid-60s, and then they'd kind of go down. And they had like 3 or 4 of these cycles. And I was just talking to the former pastor this last week, and he just felt like they just could never get past that barrier. And so when we said, hey, we'd like to plant kind of in that area, he said, don't plant there. Why don't you come and be a part of a partnership with us? And he actually suggested a phrase of revitalization, which is really where a church that's just struggling needs a fresh infusion of life somewhere in something. And so we joined forces with them, and they changed their name to Gospel Hope Church. And I was just with one of their pastors yesterday. You know what's so exciting? They had when we were able to partner with them, they didn't have the ability to pay their own pastor. In fact, their yearly budget was quite low. But you know, this year they're able to pay pay the salary of 2 full-time pastors. And they've just grown, and they're pushing past 150, and they're actually looking to do a $1.2 million addition of teaching space and parking lot space. And they've just finally figured out, man, if they could get 2 services going, they could serve 250 to 300 people. And it's a pretty exciting thing. And it's exciting that Gospel Grace was able to just be a small part of that. We had another circumstance. We had a bunch of interns that were with us for a number of years. The Mitchells, who we actually have a Mitchell here who's filming us here this morning, but they were with us for a while. And then we had the Jarretts, and then also the Moons, and they were going through some of the internships and the residencies and elder candidacy, really the internal training programs of what Gospel Grace wants to do to help create, if you'll let me say it that way, but raise up new pastors to go out into the area. And it's just been so neat to see some of the folks that have been with us since almost the beginning. I mean, the Jarretts and the Moons were with us really since almost the start of Gospel Grace. And then to see them go out with Paul Campbell and his wife Abby right here, and they formed a team and went up to Logan. Logan is very unique. It's probably less than 1% evangelical, but they were able then to start Gospel Peace Church. And As you think about those three church stories, there's more nuances. I just think of Gospel Grace's story. Wow. It has not always been easy. All the pastors had some form of bivocationality. That's where they're pastoring, but they're also working a job, or they had some form of mission support. There were times where it just, you put people together, and we're all sinners, right? And so sometimes there's strife, there's staff issues, and then sometimes there's like disappointment. Somebody puts their faith and trust in Christ and then falls away. Sometimes there's just fatigue issues. And sometimes you're like, wow, are we ever going to make it? Are we going to make it another day? And you know what? God's grace has been so evident to us here at Gospel Grace. And yet all along the way, as God's humbled us, sometimes He's humbled us by our own failures. Sometimes He's humbled us because we've tried to do too much in our own strength. Sometimes He's humbled us through external circumstances. Do you know God gets all the glory for what's happened here? I mean, anything of Christ that you taste is all to His own glory. And to think of any division that God's done. I mean, isn't it awesome to think that by God's grace 10 years ago there was none of those three churches, and then now there was almost 500 people meeting here last Sunday, and there was about 150-ish meeting down in Gospel Hope, and there was 125 or 7 up at Gospel Peace. I mean, isn't that an absolute joyful miracle? But and there's also been people that have been saved, they've just been relocated out of the state. There's probably another 50 to 100 people that have come through Gospel Grace and kind of moved out and gone to other places. And you know what? What's going on today is you're being invited not just to join a church and sit, not just come and be a spectator. We're not a spectator church. We want to be a family of people, and there's a reason for you to join. There's a reason for you to be a part. There's a reason for you just to grow in grace. And let me just give you a couple of those. One, it's a means by which God's ordained that you can just make it safely home to heaven. You need community. You need one another's in your life, speaking truth during ups and downs and hardships. I was just so blessed this last Sunday. One of the deacons came up to me and he said, "How you doing?" And I said, "I'm okay. I'm making it, one foot in front of the other. I got a little load I'm carrying right now." And he looked at me and goes, "Well, you don't need to carry that by yourself. Give me just a couple things I can take." I mean, that's what church should be like, shouldn't it? Can I tell you another cool story? One of the men in the church, he went through a big hardship. I'm going to be very vague, but hardship, and it included employment. They didn't know, they lost out money. I mean, he called me in the middle of the day. This is just a couple weeks ago. I picked up, I prayed with him, talked with him, kind of worked through. That night, we were gathered here as a men's prayer meeting, and somebody else walked up to me and said, "Hey, Will, I got this gift. I don't feel right keeping it, and it's a couple $1,000s. I don't feel right keeping it because the way and the circumstance. Do you know what I should do with it?" I said, "You know what? I was just talking to a dude this morning, and he's right there. This guy walks over and gives that man the money." I mean, that's church. That's one another's. That's caring for one another. That's loving one another. That's first. And then Ephesians tells us that we can all grow in love, and that we can be fitted together, that we can be a manifestation of the body of Christ. You know why? So we can do the work of the ministry. We can do the work of the mission. Like you know what our prayer is? That there will be another group of folks over this next year or two, that as you're just growing in grace, you're learning from 1 Corinthians, that as you're going to lead school and you're going to community group and you're just growing in grace, and all of a sudden there's a church plant, maybe on the other, Wasatch Back, there's some church plant on the other side of the mountains over in Hebrew or Park City, or there's a church plant over in Harriman, or there's a church plant over in Twilla or some other Taylorsville or something, and you're just like, you know what? I can't just sit here. You know what? I need to go. I need to be like those folks that left here and went up to Logan. I need to find a job up there, and I need to help get the gospel where it's not. And so it's our desire that you would just participate in this and just continue in the same path that the Lord has established in Gospel Grace from the very beginning, that by faith we're just going to be a people that are very purposeful about taking the gospel to those that are around us. Well, as you think about this, there's a lot of stuff we'd like to fill in. I mean, if you want to know more stories, just come talk to us about really where we've been and then by God's grace, where we want to go.